Associate Director of the Drake Center there. And on behalf of the board of the BMRC, I get the privilege of introducing the BMRC's Executive Director and then getting out of the way. I had some official notes, but I think I'm going to wing it, Camille, if that's okay with you. Camille came to us about a year and 3 months ago from New York City. We stole her from New York. She was a fixture of the art scene in New York, and we were really lucky to get her to come to Chicago. She worked for several museums there. She did the cataloging of the Romare Bearden papers, right? Since she's come to Chicago, she has really revitalized the BMRC, taking it into its next decade, right? We're here to celebrate 10 years of the BMRC. And Camille has done so many amazing things in such a short time. It's been really remarkable. Aside from her directorial duties at the BMRC, Camille also has an alter ego. And I don't know if she wants me to talk about this, but yeah, she's also an artist. Did you think I was going to say she's a superhero? She's also an artist, and she had an amazing exhibit up at the Hyde Park Art Center over the summer. She's a weaver, and she's got a talk coming up at the Cultural Center. Is that right, in December? Yeah. So please join me in welcoming Camille Brewer, and we're going to have a short program for you tonight, and she's going to lead us off and tell us a little bit about what's going on at the BMRC into the next decade, and then we're going to have a couple other speakers talk about the value of what the BMRC does. Thanks, Camille.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out this evening. What a windy, cold, starting to change the weather evening. So I appreciate you all being here this evening. Thank you to Eric for the introduction. And I would like to thank Columbia College here in Chicago, the library, for hosting this event. This is a great space to mix and mingle this evening. I would also like to thank the University of Chicago's Office of the Provost for supporting the operations of the BMRC. Susan Boone has been our champion in the Provost's office, and we couldn't do it without her support, definitely. Danielle Allen, who couldn't be here this evening, she was the former Dean of the Humanities at the University of Chicago, and she had the vision for founding the BMRC. I'd also like to thank Jacqueline Stewart, a professor in the Department of Cinema and Media Studies at the University of Chicago. She acts as our faculty advisor and acts as a PI for the grants that I write for funding to support our programs. And I want to thank all of our members, Northwestern all the way down to Chicago State and everyone in between. Thank you, thank you, thank you for continuing your support of the BMRC. We have some early founding board members here. Can you raise your hands and just wave? Mary Chase, that's all. No one's waving their hand. No.
Kim Hale.
No. Oh, Kim Hale, yes. Richard Darga, raise your hand. Come on, you're standing there.
Yeah, make sure that.
And our current board members, please raise your hands and identify yourself. Thank you. Yeah. We just had our first meeting last month. I formed a faculty advisory committee. The committee acts as a liaison between the BMRC and our academic member institutions, and they advise us on shaping goals and visions for the intellectual and scholarship engagement of the BMRC. And we will meet twice annually, and it's a great group, and we had a wonderful meeting last month. And I also like to thank the party committee for putting this all together and all the volunteers who've worked on this event. A little bit about the history of the organization. The BMRC was founded in 2006. 2006, moving faster than my mouth is. The BMRC is an unincorporated Chicago-based membership organization of libraries and museums and universities that have archival repositories. And the mission of the BMRC is to make accessible its members' holdings of materials that document African American history, culture, and life here in Chicago. And the University of Chicago acts as our host and our fiscal agent. Over the last 10 years, the BMRC has executed 3 major initiatives. The BMRC received funding from the Mellon Foundation for its survey initiative. It was a 3-year project to identify collections across the city. The group, the staff at the time, along with students, identified over 1,100 collections that needed attention. And after that project came to a close, the BMRC then sought out funding from CLEAR to process about a little more than 10%, 12% of those collections, fully process them so that they're available for researchers. In 2008, the BMRC received a 3-year grant from the Mellon Foundation to support the summer short-term fellowship program. The program was funded again in 2011, and I was able to get 3 more years of funding last year. And new original research and art that's developed in the program, and is significant because it does illuminate the rich history here nationally and internationally. You know, I've lived all over the country, and people have a tendency, well, but it's just Detroit, or we're just Atlanta. But what happens in our communities is attractive and interesting and engaging for people across the country and around the world. We had a fellow from Liverpool this last summer who's doing his work on Ebony magazine. And it was just amazing to listen to him because he had done his research. Our musicians tonight, the saxophonist, is one of our former fellows, as a matter of fact. And where did Jeff go?
I think they're having dinner.
Oh, they're having dinner.
Yeah.
Okay. You got to see the musicians always. So, highlights of the last year. I'm new. Anita Meckler is the new project manager archivist for the BMRC. We've launched a new website. You can see on the screen behind you. And we have a quarterly newsletter now and new branding, courtesy of Nicole Waddington here, a new logo. With this new fellowship money, I felt that the work would have a richer impact for the fellows as well as the community if the fellows worked in thematic cohorts. So their research dovetails each other. So if we're looking all at politics, maybe you're looking at politics in the late 19th century, you're looking at politics in the early 20th century, and fellows share information with each other. So we focused on the Great Migration and literature and writing last summer. 2016, we're going to focus on politics, the medical arts, and public health. And in 2017, we're inviting fellows to do research on urban planning, architecture, and gospel music. So that gives us a chance to do programming and looking ahead. We have folks from the Hull House here, different agencies. If you want to collaborate with the BMRC in any way, with those themes, we're open to the conversation. In April of this year, the BMRC organized a professional workshop on digital preservation for its membership. The event was well attended and it was informative for all who participated. Further details about the workshop are noted in our newsletter. So, for the future, I operated a business for 15 years, our consulting business, and you're there to serve a need, and you're relevant if you serve a need. So, my first question to members when I started was, what do you need? And the number one request was processing. You need processing. You can't digitize anything until it's processed. So I made a note of that. A lot of our members have backlog collections that need to be arranged and described, so the primary resources are available for researchers. So with that, I'm going to ask Dino Robinson to come to the mic. He's one of our members, or I should say his agency, Shorefront Legacy Center, and he can share with you how his needs were met as a member institution of the BMRC. Come on up.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'll hold the mic this way. Did you hear me better?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. My name is Dino Robinson. I am the founder of the Shorefront Legacy Center located in Evanston, Illinois. We service the North Shore suburban community, Evanston North to Lake Forest. This organization started about 20 years ago now. It's 20 years ago. And it's my avocation. I work full-time at Northwestern University as a production manager in publishing. Before that, I was an art director in advertising. So this is a passion of mine. And it came about because I visited most of the North Shore historical organizations learned something about the Black experience in the North Shore. Many places had absolutely nothing. I think the pivotal part was at the Evanston History Center. Loved them dearly. I was on their board. I was a board president. I have to say, when I went and visited them in '95 to learn about the Black community, they pulled out 3 file folders labeled colored. So I figured something had to be done about that, and I started my own personal investigation of its history. Well, that led to a real group of interested historians that want to learn more about their history. What we also knew is that there was no permanent repository to capture this experience. So in 2002, we developed Shorefront, established our board, and started our collection with our 3 file folders and updated the terminology from color. And moved forward. We grew steadily, and we were educating our community about the importance of collecting a history that's over 150 years old. Something that was not in a current dialogue in the suburban North Shore. So we're talking about development, equity, everything in there is about every other culture except for the African community. And I think the pivotal point was for us is a PBS special, all the neighborhood, history of neighborhoods in Chicago. Love that series. They have one on the history of the North Shore. It's a 90-minute program. And I thought for sure, yes, they're going to tackle something about the Black community in the North Shore. But an hour into the program, they finally hit it. I'm all drooling. I'm like, yes, we're going to learn something new. Got my pen and paper out. Total of 3 minutes. And they did this montage of imagery with text that had nothing to do with what was shown. And all I learned from that is that, we walk a lot and we sing well in church. I said, there's a lot more to this history. And we started collecting documents from community members. I would come home and people would leave boxes of archival material at our front door with a note saying, we trust you with these documents. We do not trust the local repository that's been established for over 110 years. So we built on this, but we knew we wanted not to sit in boxes and do nothing. So we organized it to the best way we could. None of us were trained historians. None of us were trained archivists. But we knew there were some processes with this. Organize them, make a little catalog of what we have, and make it available for people to consume. Then years later, I learned about the BMRC. And I think their initial process in the program was really focused on major institutions. Chicago History Center, universities, the Harsh. And then here we are, Community Archive. Hey, look at us. We have something here. We need to look at it. And I think it took about a year for that to happen. And finally, 2 members of the BMRC, Burgess Jules and Lisa Callahan, they came up to Evanston, not really to see Shorefront. They went to go see the Evanston History Center. But they said, we'll stop over at Shorefront real quick to see what they have. Well, that visit turned into a 2-hour meeting. And then them calling the History Center saying, we'll get back to you. And thus our relationship with the BMRC. Our center, with our model that we were developing, we became known as a second space archival center. Some of the early interns that trained through the BMRC program trained at Shorefront. What we like about our collections and archives is that we're hands-on. So any intern that came in, not only are you dealing with processing a collection, but 9 times out of 10, you meet with families or institutions that donated those archives. And Dustin Wisman did a stellar job. He's one of our first BMRC art processors. And he processed our first 50 collections. And by that time, that was about 70% of our collection. To this day, we have doubled our holdings. And so now we have over 175 linear feet of unprocessed materials now. So we need more interns. So if anybody, come on, we can use you. His highlight was trying to make sense of a multi-generational family that was a pastor of a church, a mortician, and a businessman. Horace Sr., Horace Jr., Horace III. And we were getting them all confused, like who is what, who did what. I said, oh, don't worry about that, I'll call them up real quick. He came in with his, Horace Jr. came in with his son, and they spent the next 3 hours going through each of the documents that were in there and making a good note of what was happening with his son. He later told me that was the best experience he had ever had. He was so glad that he got passed up. And no offense to the Chicago History Center, but that was his first choice. He chose to be a shorefront first. So I have to thank Dustin and Listening for that. So to this day, the BMRC and the staff, the board, has supported Shorefront in many, many meaningful ways. That put one, Shorefront on the map. It provided a voice in competition with larger institutions that have been well established. And we're able to bring our material out to the general public for people to use. I always like to say that we don't want our archives to stay in boxes and locked up somewhere. Our archives are living archives. They're growing. We may have a process, but we leave it open-ended because we're still in discovery mode. And we're still growing. And in fact, just last week, we probably acquired another 10 linear feet of material. And what I call the stealth midnight runs at the church parking lot. Just one person to another trunk and say, don't tell me we got this. We've had many fellows work out of Shorefront. Mary Barr was one of them who wrote the book Friends Disappear. She spent the summer with us, and we ended up being heavily credited in her publication. Rachel Swarns, national journalist, wrote the book American Tapestry, the history of Michelle Obama's lineage. Turns out that we ended up being quoted there because we found out that Michelle Obama's great-grandmother lived in Evanston. So I had to paint a picture for Rachel Swarns, what Evanston was like, where these communities were located, and how they disappeared. We had the McGowan YMCA use our extensive photographic collection on the Emerson Street Branch YMCA, a segregated YMCA, and it became a documentary video on the lives and experiences of people at the segregated Emerson Street Branch YMCA. And then we have independent people come in with their own work. Alice Ordinary People. She passed away earlier this year. She was a heavy, strong advocate in the civil rights movement in Chicago, early supporter of Operation Breadbasket, which became Operation Push, and she developed she wrote the curriculum for the Political Action Committee. So we did a documentary on her. Another gentleman did another documentary on just Evanston local history. So now Evanston and North Shore is put on the map. 10 years ago, if you tried to Google Black history in the North Shore, you won't find much. Now we find that we're filling up the 3 first pages of Google. That's extremely important. We have put a voice on the silent community in the North Shore that has been removed from its local history and now put back in place where it should be. And I thank the BMRC for helping us with that process and putting the right things in front of the community for them to use. Find these online. We have professionals come from across the country to use or find more information about specific studies in the North Shore. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. So what do our members need? Processing and support. So what does the research community need? The rich history and varied contributions of Americans need to be illuminated in the historical record to tell a better nuanced history of Greater Chicago, history of the Midwest region, and of the nation and of the world. And at this point, I'd like to invite Lionel Kimball to the lectern to talk about the needs of historians.
I always come to these things and I try to write notes down. You know, I'm kind of an old school historian. I have this iPad here, which I never really use. I type it up. But I decided against reading. I'd just rather just talk about some of the things. I wrote down last night. I had a very interesting road to my my relationship with archives. When I went away to school, I was a chemical engineering major. And about 2 years into my program at Iowa, I realized I had a very dysfunctional relationship with math and science. So I decided I wanted to do something else. And as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be with my life, I started thinking about some of the old stories my grandmother told me about growing up in Chicago, right? And this what led me on the path to be a historian, right? But like most, I think, undergraduates in history, I really had no idea what a historian did. You know, I thought they went somewhere and they grabbed a bunch of books and a bunch of newspaper articles and sat in some little corner in the library, and a few months later, a book comes out, right? Not really understanding the nuances and understand how important archives and archivists were, you know. And I think what we find here is that historians and archive and archivists had a very symbiotic relationship, right? Neither one of the groups can exist without the other, right? Because as historians, right, we think we have this story that we want to tell, and we think we know where the stuff is, but what we really find is that is the archivists, right, in their day-to-day understanding of these collections, they enable us to do the things that we do, right? We get the glory and they do all the hard work, right? So that's really one of the things that I was dealing with. So what Camille wanted me to talk about is not just the academic part, but I think she wanted to talk about a couple of stories about the BMRC and my relationship with archives, right? I teach telling stories. I don't do traditional lecture stuff. I like to tell stories. I find that people remember stories more. So I had 3 stories, really. The first is when I really got into history. You know, I was about junior in college, and I thought I wanted to do Civil War and Reconstruction. I wanted to write the next great book on Black masculinity during the Civil War. And then I went to grad school, and I looked at it, those who are familiar, the records of the plantation South, and I said, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm not doing 19th century stuff at all, because I can't read that stuff, all right? So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I really thought about where Chicago was and how Chicago got where it was. And really, this story comes out of a reading of Thomas Segru's Origins of the Urban Crisis, right? So when that book comes out in, 1996, 97, I went to a conference in Detroit, the North American Labor History Conference. And me and some colleagues would sneak across the border in this car with the University of Iowa tattooed on the side and go across the border to, how can I say this, buy contraband cigars. All right, the embargo is over now, so I can really say that. So we come back across the Ambassador Bridge, and we're driving through Detroit, and we get lost, right? And we're driving through this neighborhood full of burned out buildings, and I'm trying to figure out what happened to Detroit, right? Why does Detroit look this way? And reading Segru's book and thinking about being a kid in Chicago and growing up in Chicago, said, why does Detroit go one way and Chicago goes the other way, right? So it gets me to thinking, right, I need to write this book about Chicago and why Chicago went one way and Detroit went the other way, right, during the Second World War, right? But when I started, I had no idea how to do it, right? I thought I knew the story, but I really didn't. So I started to embark on my trips to these various archives. And the first archive I went to really wasn't in Chicago. The first one I went to, I won this award from the OAH, Organization of American Historians. I had this research money to go out and do research. So I go out to the National Archives out in Maryland, and I meet the late Walter Hill. I'm not sure if people would know Walter Hill, but Walter Hill was a fantastic person, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm nervous, right? I have no idea what the hell I'm doing in this archive, and I tell people what I'm going to do. So I need to talk to Walter Hill. And the first thing Walter Hill tells me is, oh, you need to come in the back with the good stuff. Not out there with the research room. He takes me to the back. There's a back office and boxes. He starts throwing boxes at me. And he said, these are the NVPC tension files. I'm called tension files. This is something great, right? So here's this man who didn't know me from Adam, right? Who's taken this interest in my work, and he tells me what the good stuff is, right? So the second story I have is, again, on this process in graduate school, not knowing what the hell I'm really doing these things. And there's this database, Archives USA, right, which is very similar to what the BMRC is trying to do locally. Archives USA was this database where you do keyword searches in archives. I'm like, this is great, right? This is new world being open to me, right? As a young developing scholar, it puts me in line with all of these materials that at that moment I had no idea existed. So that's the second story. The third story is a very recent story. I just published my first book. And it's on Black Chicago, right? So as I was doing the editing process, and those who have done the publishing process know, we get these things. I go into the library and I try to get illustrations. I'm really excited now. But as most dissertations go, right, from the dissertation process to the publishing process, it's a very long time. For me, it was 15 years, right? So I go in there and I'm looking up illustrations, and I had these things from all these years ago, and I have no idea how to cite this particular picture. So I go down to the Woodson Library and I talk to Cynthia. I said, Cynthia, I have this photo. I have no idea when it came from. She said, well, I'll look it up. I'm a type A personality. I saw Cynthia go behind the desk, start typing some things on. So I put my laptop out. I'm going to erase it. So I'm going to try to find where this picture came from. Right? So I'm Googling things. She comes back, oh, here it is. Here's the date. She does it literally in 35 seconds. And she says, that's what archivists, that's what we can do. Right. And I appreciated her help there. And especially, for me, the Woodson Library, the Harsh collection was invaluable to me, right? And I remember, and I tell people all the time, as a graduate student working there, Michael Flug had his policy that said, your money is no good here policy, right? Which saved me a lot. The free copies, the free access to help, that was invaluable to any scholar. All right, so that's one thing. But as I was preparing this talk, I thought about some other personal things to me. I'm not only a historian, I'm faculty of Chicago State University, but in my off time, I belong to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Right, Carter G. Woodson started this organization, started the association in Chicago in 1950, September 9, 1950. We just celebrated our centennial. Right, and as Camille was talking about the mission of the BMRC to preserve and catalog African American history here in Chicago, here regionally, I think about Woodson. Right, so when Woodson comes to Chicago in 1950, right, he goes down to the Coliseum Auditorium and he sees for the Jubilee celebration. The state of Illinois sponsored this large celebration commemorating Abraham Lincoln, the end of slavery, the end of the Civil War. And they have this event down at the Coliseum Auditorium, right? And the records of this meeting are very sketchy, right? We don't have any programs on what went on there. We don't know who was there. Right? We have an idea about some of the folks that were there. But we do know that Woodson was there selling posters, right? He talks about these posters he was selling, right? So Woodson looked at the tens of thousands of people. There were stories of tens of thousands of people waiting outside the Coliseum to get in there. Regular people, right? Think about it. 1915, right? Woodson is one of a handful of PhDs. He's the only PhD in history, right? So he goes there and he sells posters. He teaches high school out in DC and he comes here. And he's out there and he sees all of these exhibits and all these people producing this stuff about black folk, right? And he goes back to the Wabash Y where he was staying, right, was just recently closed, right? And he formed his organization with a colleague of his from DC and 3 Chicagoans, right? And they formed the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, right? And then he goes back out to DC, stays here for a few months, and he goes back out to DC and he incorporates out there. Now, why is Woodson so important? Well, we know, those of us who study Black history, know Woodson is the father of Black history, right? I have my little centennial pen here. I'm an outgoing board member, right, president of the Chicago branch. But there's a couple of things about Woodson and his connection to sort of like to the infancy of the BMRC. And it's this woman named Vivian Harsh, right? We know the story. I think most of us know the story of Vivian Harsh, right? Vivian Harsh and Charlotte May Rollins, they down at the George Cleveland Hall Library, right? One of the first libraries specifically for Black people in the country, right? Answered Woodson's call and start collecting and documenting, right, Black history here in Chicago, right? Charlotte May Rollins almost single-handedly developed the children's collection at the George Cleveland Hall Library, right? Paul was one of the founders of the association. And thinking about what the BMRC does, and one of the things that I do with the association is, I think that conduit is Vivian Harsh. The association has 2 meetings here in Chicago, one 1935, 20th anniversary, and and one in 1977. I heard in 1977 one was like just crazy important. It was crazy exciting. Those folks who were there
Yes.
tell these stories about 1977. Kathleen, you were there, right?
Yeah.
I think they tell this story about 1977 was the conference. But I do have to say myself, I think the one in 2015, I think that might be the best one.
Yeah.
I think that may be the best one. I was a program chair. I think it was the best one ever.
You should have
Right.
been here, but it was good.
Yeah, well, that's a whole, right. But it's Vivian Harsh is this bridge between Woodson and I think it was BMRC, right? Because Harsh was at the 1935 convention. Harsh was there. There's a very famous picture of Woodson sitting there with a scowl on it. Woodson always had a scowl on his face, right? But there's a picture of those who have seen it at the Hall Library, right? It's Vivian Harsh who's there. She's an archivist, right? Working with Woodson, working with the father of Black history, right? Here in Chicago, right? Which I think brings us to the BMRC. Because without these two individuals, I think that a lot of the stuff that we do, a lot of the stuff that we love, may have taken a very different direction if they had done the things that they've done. And that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Chicago was well represented at the Association for African American Life and History, and saying this wrong, in Atlanta. So we had, I don't know, how many folks?
1,600.
1,600 total, but from Chicago,
We
probably
had,
a third.
About 1575.
Yeah, it was great. So we've talked about what the members need, and we've talked about what the research community needs, but what does the profession need? The archival management workforce needs to reflect the communities we serve and the collections that we describe. So with that in mind, taking into account what our members need and what the research community needs, I thought, well, how do I accomplish this goal? So I thought, we've got to train young people to work and fill the ranks. I'm getting a call from Beverly Cook down at Vivian Harsh. She says, Camille, we need some young people. Come on, bring us some young people. So I devised a plan to create a new internship program. And I decided it would be a great honor to name the internship program after Archie Motley. So tonight we're launching the Archie Motley internship program. I've submitted 2 proposals for funding to start a pilot project. It's designed to provide students of color with work opportunities to gain practical experience, earn money while they're in school, and enhance their educational experience. We're designing the program to recruit students as a means to address the issue of severe underrepresentation of critically needed archivists within the archives profession. The vision of the program is threefold. 1, to enhance student learning as well as personal and professional development. 2, to expose students to career options available in libraries, archives, and special collections. And 3, to diversify the applicant pool for positions in cultural heritage management. And with that, I would like to introduce Valerie Brown to the lectern to talk about Archie Motley. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. As the widow of Archie Motley and a retired member of the archival profession, I retired as director of the Women in Leadership Archives at Loyola. I'm really moved and deeply grateful to the BMRC and to Camille Brewer for choosing me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hold it up. Anyway, this is just such a meaningful way to honor Archie and our profession. By establishing the Archie Motley archival internship, you are supporting the important work to which Archie devoted his life. He actually fell at the Chicago Historical Society, and work that promotes greater understanding of our world, work that has been really near and dear to both of our hearts. That sounds like a lot of you know Archie, but you all may not. But in case you don't, Archie was a bright, engaging man of unquestionable integrity. He stood up for what he believed in, and he asked us to question our actions and hold ourselves to a higher standard. He was a staunch advocate of the underrepresented, the underdocumented, and the underdogs of the world. And he carried his work into this belief system into his work as an archivist. I often thought of him as the conscience of the profession. Archie spent his entire career at the Chicago History Society, now the Chicago History Museum. There he was a pioneer in collecting the papers of African Americans and other underdocumented segments of our society about which too little is known. And this is doing it in a primarily more privileged white setting. So that was really important. His greatest joy, besides our daughter Mara, of course, was connecting people with information that would help them meet their research needs and interests. His uncanny ability to do so made him a favorite for researchers who also appreciated his wide-ranging knowledge of African American history, labor history, radical history, sports history, and of course Chicago history. None of this would have been possible without his foresight in collecting these materials in the first place, then preserving, processing, and making them available for research. As a result, Archie is probably thanked in more books and more effusively than any other archivist in the United States. One of the most powerful ways to continue Archie's pioneering work is to foster ethnic diversity in the profession. It is crucially important that more people of color are involved in archival activities, people who understand and are part of the culture and the community, people who can best identify materials that truly represent the people and the community. This is how meaningful research can take place, resulting in fuller, richer understanding that benefits all of us. The primary source materials found in archives are the stuff of which books and articles are written, as we've already heard. Answers to basic questions are found in so much more. These materials come in a myriad of forms and can be letters, photographs, oral histories, ledger books, minutes of meetings, and so much more. I can say from my own experience, the most valuable part of my archival training was my internship in the Archives of Labor and Urban Affairs at Wayne State University. The hands-on experience of working with archival materials helped me understand the wealth of information they contain about people, their motivations, and their institutions. This experience underscored the importance of these records for understanding our history from the grassroots up. This experience made me want to be an archivist. And receiving payment for this experience, as will be done with the Archie Motley Archival Internship, is the best of all worlds, both for the intern and for the archival repository, who's always looking for help, often underfunded. Please accept my heartfelt thanks for honoring and so meaningfully continuing the work of Archie Motley, a man of color who pioneered in the collection of records and manuscripts of African Americans, thus making fuller knowledge of the richness of our cultural heritage possible and promoting scholarship and learning. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming out again for this program. There's more drink, there's more food, and we have a birthday cake for the BMRC this evening. So partake. Good to see you all. Thank you.